What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. Back in my regular setup and everything, so it should be good to go with the production quality being at least back to its usual level. Obviously not extremely high, but doing what we can here. So it was a really exciting week 12. Had a lot of really high-scoring games, a lot of fun surprises, and hopefully you guys managed to get a win. We've got just 2 weeks left in the fantasy football regular season for most of you guys. A lot of trade deadlines have passed. I'll still be making those trade videos this week just in case you guys have trade deadlines that are later in the season or don't have them at all. So I'll keep making those videos, but for a lot of us, we're getting to the point where this really is crunch time. We've got 2 weeks to either get ourselves that bye, get ourselves into the playoffs, or do everything we can to sort of optimize our rosters once we get into those playoffs. So hopefully you guys are in a good position. Not a ton of like super high end names in the waiver wire this week, which in some sense is good. It means we didn't have any major injuries that are really shaking anything up too much, but still a lot of guys that I think can help contribute to your rosters. And I think that obviously waivers, especially in those leagues where those trade deadlines have already passed, this is the only thing you can do left to really improve your roster the rest of the season. So it's going to be really important to make sure we hit on a couple guys over the next couple weeks and get ourselves all set for those fantasy playoffs. So, as always, if you guys have any specific ad drop questions, just let me know in the comments. I love helping you guys get everything set there. Happy to give you guys my opinion on everybody. Includes any sort of fab suggestions. I would say I don't really try and include any sort of fab recommendations specifically in the video, just because it's so roster and league dependent. If you really need a running back and you're in a 10-team league, then maybe it makes sense to pay up for a guy, or if you really just have no fab left or whatever. It's just tough, especially this late in the season, for me to give you any sort of reasonably useful fab suggestions without getting more context. So if you do want fab recommendations, give me more context in the comments as well, and I'm happy to help you out there. But should be a lot of fun. And yeah, with that, let's just get into the first position here. So we'll start with the quarterbacks. So starting things off at the quarterback position, I think Jordan Love for me is going to be my priority ad. He started to look really good. Just watching him play football, I know the Lions aren't like an elite pass defense by any means, but he played really well against them this last week on Thanksgiving. Looked really good the week before against the Chargers, and I know that those are two not fantastic pass defenses by any means, but we just saw the Chargers hold Lamar and this Ravens offense down pretty well. Jordan Love's looking really good. He's a little bit more mobile than I think people give him credit for too. He had a huge run down the left sideline just this last week. He's going to give you some sort of rushing floor, and I really do think this Packers offense in general is turning the corner. They're a historically offensive and pass friendly team. They've actually got a really solid wide receiver core as well between Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson. I really like Jaden Reed. I think he might be their best player in the passing game. Luke Musgrave is good. Tyler Kraft is playing well. Obviously, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon gets the ball out of the backfield. So this offense has plenty of weapons, and their defense isn't special by any means. So I think Jordan Love's in a situation where we can legitimately be like a fringe top 10 quarterback the rest of the season. They've got a tougher matchup this week against the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Chiefs will at least be scoring some points. The Chiefs are going to obviously have a lead in this game, and that means the Packers will have to throw the ball. So I think Jordan Love's a guy you can screw him this week, and then I know it's a little bit tough as far as the matchup goes, but he's got to think you can use the rest of the season as well. So if he's on waivers, he does need to be rostered at this point. Matthew Stafford played really well this last week through 4 touchdown passes, looked the best he's looked all season, and he did it without really having to hyper-target Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. Kupp didn't seem to be 100%, and that means that there's really even further room to grow for this offense. I will note, however, they do play the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens these next 2 weeks, so not a matchup that I'm going to feel super confident in, but perhaps Kyren Williams returning to the team really helps elevate them, gives them a bit more of a rushing game. He looked really, really good this last week, and even in these tough matchups, I think you could potentially consider streaming Stafford, and their schedule gets a lot easier come the fantasy playoffs. So I think Stafford's a guy that you can consider rostering, especially if you've been streaming the position. He could help you in the playoffs. Joshua Dobbs, he continues to be on a lot of waiver wires as well. He might fall onto a lot of waiver wires, especially this week, as the Vikings have their bye in week 13. He's just a guy that gives you enough on the rushing game, is a good enough passer. They're going to get Justin Jefferson back in week 14. I think Joshua Dobbs needs to be rostered in effectively 100% of leagues going forward. Sam Howell, he continues to look mediocre to good, and he's just passing the ball a ton. Could potentially end up on waivers here at some point after a really bad performance against the Cowboys. I think Sam Howell does need to be rostered in more leagues. And then Gardner Minshew continues to play well enough. The Colts have a plus matchup this week against the Tennessee Titans, I believe, who are a really great pass funnel defense. Gardner Minshew looked good enough, was decent enough for fantasy against the Buccaneers, and the Titans are a really good matchup as well. So I do think Minshew should be rostered. Next up, we got the running back position. I really want to start things off with Keaton Mitchell, who we finally saw sort of take the reins in that backfield. He had more rushes and more snaps played than Gus Edwards. He got the first snaps of the game at running back position, and we really didn't see much of Justice Hill at all. So this really does seem to be like the two running back backfield at this point. Keaton Mitchell is very clearly the most explosive running back they have, and without Mark Andrews there, I think there's going to be a lot of targets to go around as well. They're still sort of figuring out how this offense is going to work without Mark Andrews. We didn't really see this offense really click on all cylinders, and I think they'll still figure it out. There's going to be plenty of touchdown upside going forward. Keaton Mitchell is obviously a threat to hit a home run on pretty much any given play, and he's just a guy that I really do want to have on my roster. They've got obviously the bye this week in week 13, so I think he could be a pretty popular drop even for people that potentially added him. Might still be on waivers and he won't show up, so I don't think you'll have to spend too much on him, but he is a guy that I really do think could be a potential home run for you guys come the fantasy playoffs. So Keaton Mitchell does need to be rostered in probably 100% of leagues, to be completely honest. Chuba Hubbard, I want to mention him as well. There's going to be a lot of shakeup in Carolina at this point. They just fired Frank Reich this morning. They've had plenty of other coaching staff shifts as well. And I don't really know exactly how this offense is going to shake out, but Chuba continues to perform really well. He had 5 receptions for about 50 yards, scored a touchdown, had about 50 rushing yards as well, and just looks to be the better back in Carolina than Miles Sanders. He did actually get out-carried by Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders did have more carries in the game, so we do want to keep that in mind. They've got a really tough matchup this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I think it's just sort of a wait-and-see approach for me. I think Chuba's a guy that needs to be rostered just so we can see how things shake up. Obviously, this new coaching staff is going to be in the fold. They won't be the guys that necessarily spent all that money and brought Miles Sanders in. They're not going to be as attached to him. So there's a world that exists where we see Chuba Hubbard become like a lead back in this offense, and their schedule does get a little bit easier going forward after this week against Tampa Bay. So Chuba needs to be rostered for sure. Ezekiel Elliott, I'll mention him. Continues to be involved enough that you could play him in like a desperate situation if you really needed to. The Patriots have a plus matchup this week playing the Los Angeles Chargers, who are really not a team that can defend the run at all. This is a situation for the Chargers where they could really just implode. They're 4-7 at this point. A lot of times we see teams like this sort of just implode at this point in the season. I would bet the Chargers get back in the driver's seat, win the game here against the Patriots. They really do need to win that game and should win it, but it's a really bad run defense. Zeke's involved and needs to be rostered for sure. You could play him in a pinch with all the buys we've got in week 13, and then on top of that, if anything were to ever happen to Ramondre Stevenson, Zeke would be like a fringe top 20 running back the rest of the way. So Zeke's a guy that I think needs to be rostered in most leagues. Samaje Perine, I want to bring him up as well. Just continues to look really good for the Broncos. They clearly showed quite a bit of rapport with Russell Wilson, his ability to be a nice check down option for them in the last couple 2-minute drills. And then this last week, he actually got a lot more carries. We didn't see much of Jaleel McLaughlin at all, so it seems like we're sort of back to this being Javonte and Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine as well. Got a goal line carry, scored a touchdown, looked good. We also saw Javonte Williams leave the game at one point with an injury. He did come back in, but we know Javonte Williams has that injury history, and this offense in Denver is starting to look a lot better. On top of that, their schedule actually opens up in terms of who their opponents are these next couple of weeks. They play the Texans this week, you can certainly run on, and they get the Los Angeles Chargers in Week 14. 2 defenses that don't scare you, and their playoff schedule is also not bad either. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity here for this Broncos offense to potentially perform at a higher level going forward. They might not be able to lean on their defense quite as much as they have lately. So I think Samaje Perine does need to be rostered, and especially in PPR leagues, could certainly be used in a pinch. Elijah Mitchell, along with the rest of the guys I'm going to talk about here. Like I said, we didn't have a whole lot of movement at the running back position. We're at the point in the season where a lot of those roles are really defined, and a lot of these injuries, you need an injury to happen for a lot of movement to happen. So these next 5 guys are 5 guys that I really just think need to be rostered just in case of an injury. They could also be potentially used in a pinch if you needed them, but Elijah Mitchell, obviously the pure handcuff here to Christian McCaffrey. They play the Eagles this week. You're obviously not going to be looking at Elijah Mitchell as a guy you can play without an injury to Christian McCaffrey, but this Niners offense is clicking and they look elite, and if anything happened to Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell potentially would be like a top 15 running back. So I definitely want Elijah Mitchell rostered. I've got him rostered in a couple of leagues, just waiting and seeing. Obviously, we never want to root for an injury, but the upside is immense if something happened there. Tyler Algier, I want to mention him. Another handcuff that's a talented player. They play the Jets this next week. A really actually mediocre defense against the run. We just saw them give up over 100 total rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Ended up going to Raheem Mostert. A very great pass defense in New York, but you can certainly run on them. You could consider yourself as someone that could play Tyler Algier in a pinch. You'd be banking on a touchdown, but we'll see what happens necessarily there. But the Falcons are a team, their schedule is relatively easy the rest of the way. They could win a lot of games. I do think that deep down they do want to make this a pretty even split and think that they could potentially save Bijan Robinson for a situation where they can maybe make a playoff push at the end of the season, give him more volume once they get into those must-win games. On top of that, if anything did happen to Bijan Robinson, we've seen Algier just at the end of last year be a featured back in this offense and be a really high-end performer. So Algier needs to be rostered for sure. Obviously, the upside's there if something happened to Bijan. And like I said, he's a guy that you can use in a pinch without an injury, just not someone that I'd be excited about. Rico Dowdle continues to look relatively good for the Dallas Cowboys. They play the Seattle Seahawks this week on Thursday Night Football. Bit of a better day Thursday Night Football than what we've had in the past, but Dowdle's the guy again. I don't think you can necessarily play him without an injury happening to Tony Pollard, but Tony Pollard obviously has an injury history. He's a smaller back. He's a guy that we could see an injury happening to, and if something were to happen there, Rico Dowdle would be a featured running back in a really good offense. So I do want Dowdle to be rostered in pretty much every single league, and I'm holding on to him in one or two leagues myself. Dearness Johnson, I'll bring him up. He's probably more available for people. He is effectively supplanted Tank Bigsby, a really popular handcuff in Jacksonville. Very clearly, he is the guy that you want to roster behind Travis Etienne. Obviously, Etienne is still getting the majority of the work here, but we have seen a bit of a shift. They're sort of utilizing two running backs. Dearness Johnson has looked really good the last couple of weeks as well, has made a couple of big plays. And Dearness Johnson's always been a really good player when given opportunities back in Cleveland. He had a couple of really big games over the years, and he's a guy that if anything didn't happen to Travis Etienne, Dearness Johnson's got the talent. He'd have the opportunity. He'd be a guy that we could easily see be a top 15 running back in that situation. And then Kenneth Gainwell, an obvious one as well. I've talked at large about how great DeAndre Swift's fantasy football playoff schedule is. He's got some of the best matchups in that stretch. They play teams like the Arizona Cardinals, who we just saw get absolutely eaten alive by the Rams on the ground. If something were to happen to DeAndre Swift, which I can't say would be extremely shocking given his injury history, Kenneth Gainwell would immediately be a priority handcuff, a priority out off the waiver wire, could easily be a top 10 running back during those weeks, and he'd be a guy that with that kind of volume and that kind of offense against those teams that they're going to be playing could legitimately be a league winner. So I think Gainwell needs to be rostered in pretty much every league just in case that injury happens, because he could be a huge needle mover for you if you needed it. Next up, we got the wide receiver position. I'll start things off with Jaden Reed. I talked about him last week. I just want to bring him up again. I think that he is legitimately the best wide receiver that the Green Bay Packers have. I've also talked about how I think that Jordan Love has been playing a lot better lately, and he's actually just starting to pass the eye test for me. Jordan Love has got legitimate arm talent. He's a talented player. He seems like he's getting more comfortable in this offense, and Jaden Reed's a guy that I think could legitimately be like that kind of rookie receiver that breaks out towards the second half of the season. I think we could see a really strong finish to this year for Jaden Reed, and I do want him on a lot of my rosters. Brandon Cooks, I want to talk about him. He's obviously shown in the last couple of weeks that he can perform at a high level. Very clearly the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, and the Cowboys are rolling on the offense. Dak Prescott's playing out of his mind, and having the number 2 wide receiver in that offense is certainly something that needs to be not just locked out. He's certainly someone that should be rostered and someone that you can play if you need to. Josh Downs, not a great week this last week, sort of coming into the week questionable with an injury. But another really plus matchup this week is the Tennessee Titans, a guy that I still think is like a flex / wide receiver 3 worthy player going forward. And he's a guy that just looks really good. I really like his ability. He's a really quality rookie wide receiver, and another one of those guys that could see increased usage down the stretch. So Josh Downs seems to be on most rosters as well. Jameson Williams looks more and more comfortable in this Detroit Lions offense. We've seen a couple of explosive plays out of him. He just looks like he's playing better. He looks more comfortable out there. And he's a guy that I really do want on my rosters because I do believe that breakout has a chance to happen. Obviously less secure than some of the guys I talked about earlier, like Reed, Cooks, and Downs. Those are guys that I think you can play right away, and I wouldn't be playing Jameson Williams this week, especially against what's normally a relatively tough defense in New Orleans. But Jameson Williams is a supposedly really good player. We've seen flashes of it lately, and I think that usage could balloon here soon. So Williams is a guy that if you can afford it, I think is a really nice bench add. Speaking of really great bench ads, Jalen Hyatt I think is someone that we need to take a look at here. He's very clearly the most explosive wide receiver that the New York Giants have. He's just an elite deep threat, someone that really does have that speed that a lot of other wide receivers don't have, can really be a threat that this offense just really needs. And on top of that, the Giants have a bye this week, so you're not going to have to spend any sort of fab to get Jalen Hyatt. I don't know that I'm necessarily comfortable playing him right out of the bye either, but there is a chance as well that we see Tyrod Taylor come back. We've seen the offense perform at a bit of a higher level with that. Tommy DeVito's played at least decent enough that Jalen Hyatt could be useful, and he's just one of those rookies, high draft capital, elite at something. It's sort of what I'm looking for with a lot of these like non-elite rookie prospects, is someone who actually just offers elite ability at something. I think Jalen Hyatt is an elite deep threat. He's one of the fastest guys in the NFL, and he's someone that I definitely think has at least a chance to potentially break out. So, especially in deeper leagues, he needs to be on rosters. Curtis Samuel caught 9 passes for 100 yards again. He's just a guy that's involved in this Washington Commanders offense. They play the Miami Dolphins this week. They're obviously going to have to score a lot of points if they want to be even remotely competitive in that one. The Commanders are sort of falling apart in general. They're not going to be a team that's going to win very many games. They're going to be trailing from behind. Sam Howell is going to continue to lead the league in pass attempts, and a lot of those are going to go to Curtis Samuel. So especially in PPR formats, I think Curtis Samuel is a really solid flex option. Noah Brown, I want to bring him up. CJ Stroud just continues to play out of his mind. He's clearly the rookie of the year at this point. Honestly, he's got a case to be made for being the MVP this season. And Noah Brown has missed the last couple of weeks. But we saw the 2 weeks in a row prior where he was just an elite fantasy asset, sort of really burned really bright, had 2 really great weeks. Then we haven't really seen him in this offense since then, obviously missing the last couple of weeks with injury. But it's my opinion that really when he comes back, it's clearly going to be him, Jaden Reed, or him, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins, the 3 wide receivers. I think we'll see Robert Woods sort of slide his way onto the bench. And Noah Brown, and the way this Texans offense is cooking. I really do think there's a situation where Brown, even as the third wide receiver in that offense, could be someone that could be fantasy relevant. So he needs to be rostered for sure. Greg Dortch, I just want to bring him up again. We'll see what happens with Michael Wilson, but as long as Michael Wilson is out, Greg Dortch is continuing to get called upon. They're giving him a lot of targets. He had 9 targets this last week. I know it only turned into 3 catches, but he did score. Kyler Murray does offer more upside for this Cardinals offense that we've normally seen. And then on top of that, they play the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, a team that you can throw on pretty well. So I think Greg Dortch, if you're really in a pinch, especially in a deeper league, you could potentially flex him this week. Devontae Parker, I'll mention him. We saw Demario Douglas leave the game with an injury as well. Devontae Parker was effectively acting as their number 1 wide receiver for a little bit. Him and Douglas were pretty close in terms of targets and snaps. But Devontae Parker's got a shot to be the number 1 wide receiver for the New England Patriots. They've got a plus matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers this week. And Devontae Parker's shown that he can score as well. He's definitely a red zone threat, and he's healthy enough now. It was just a concussion. There's nothing that's really limiting him in terms of his ability to move on the field. So Devontae Parker's a guy that if you're really desperate, I could see yourself using. Elijah Moore, I'll mention him as well. Decent matchup this week against the Los Angeles Rams, and we saw Amari Cooper leave this last game with a rib injury. We'll see what happens with Amari Cooper, but it did look like it was a pretty bad hit. He took a helmet to the ribs. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we see Elijah Moore basically have to operate as the wide receiver 1 for this Browns offense. We could easily see Joe Flacco come in as well, and if you remember, just last year even we saw Joe Flacco actually throw the ball quite a bit to Elijah Moore in New York. They actually have some sort of chemistry there. So if we see Joe Flacco taking the reins for the Cleveland Browns, we could see Elijah Moore being honestly flex viable if you need him. And then I just want to mention Marvin Mims. I know we've mentioned him several times, but like I said earlier, I think this Broncos offense is going to have to throw the ball quite a bit more. They've got matchups against the Texans and the Chargers the next 2 weeks. Should be teams they have to throw the ball against. And Marvin Mims is just a very clearly really talented wide receiver, someone that I think could easily be one of those late season bloomers at the wide receiver position. Really quality player. We could see an increased role for him. Jerry Jeudy hasn't done a lot, and I think there's a case to be made that Marvin Mims just needs to touch the ball a lot more. So if they end up doing that, I know it's kind of late in the season for us to expect that sort of change in the offense, but if it did happen, I think Marvin Mims could easily be a guy that ends up being super valuable for fantasy. So if you're in a really deep league and you've got a free bench spot, I think Marvin Mims should be rostered a little bit more than he is right now. Next up, we got a tight end position. I'll start things off with the really obvious ad here, and that's going to be Pat Freiermuth. He's coming off of a game with over 120 receiving yards, looked really good. It was the first game of the season where the Steelers' offense even looked good at all, and obviously it's the first game of the season where they didn't have Matt Canada, and a lot of that's because they actually started utilizing the middle of the field, which is where Pat Freiermuth is going to operate. They've got a plus matchup this week against the Arizona Cardinals, who just give up 2 passing touchdowns to Tyler Higbee. Pat Freiermuth's got a shot to be one of those late season additions to the tight end position that could be a legitimate difference maker. He's a talented tight end. We've seen it in the past. We know he's a good player, and that if they give him that kind of role, he's going to be good in it. So I think Pat Freiermuth is a priority add if you need a tight end. If maybe you lost Mark Andrews, I think he'd be a guy that you definitely need to add. We talked about him last week as a guy that you could consider adding just to see what happens, but I really think that if you did lose Mark Andrews, he's a guy that you need to be targeting. If you need a tight end, he's a guy that could legitimately be a top 10 guy the rest of the way. And after that, it's a lot less exciting options. I'll mention Gerald Everett. Scored a touchdown this last week. There's really nobody in this Chargers offense outside of Keenan Allen that I think Justin Herbert has any sort of faith in. Even Austin Eckler is not performing at a high level. We saw Quentin Johnson get benched this last week. Jalen Guyton hasn't done much. Joshua Palmer's still on IR. I think Gerald Everett's effectively the number 2 or number 3 option in this offense. He's a good player when given the opportunity, and obviously this Patriots defense that they'll be playing has not been fantastic. So you can play Gerald Everett this week if you need to. Logan Thomas, I'll mention him. He's like a staple for this waiver video every single week. Involved enough in the offense that you could use him if you need to. Obviously a talented enough player that he's getting the volume. You could use him in a pinch, but obviously there's no real ceiling there. You're just hoping he gets 4 or 5 catches and falls in the end zone, but you can play Logan Thomas if you need to. Dalton Schultz, I'll mention him. Obviously not the week you wanted out of him this last week. Only 1 catch for 6 yards, but he was on the field quite a bit. They play the Denver Broncos this week, who are the best matchup in the NFL for playing tight ends against. They give up a ton of fantasy points to the opposing tight end, and Dalton Schultz, especially the way that CJ Stroud's been playing, is not someone that I'd be moving away from. But if someone panic dropped him or anything, he'd be a guy that'd be comfortable picking up and just playing this week. And then Jawan Johnson, I'll mention him for the New Orleans Saints. Not a great game this last week, but they play the Detroit Lions this week. It's a decent matchup for them. And on top of that, we saw injuries just everywhere for the New Orleans Saints. We saw Chris Olave leave the game with a concussion. We saw Rashid Shaheed leave the game with an injury. It's considered week to week at this point. So there is a real scenario where the Saints have to go into this next game against the Lions down Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, and Rashid Shaheed, their top 3 wide receivers. And if that were to happen, I think Juwan Johnson would see a huge boost in target share, be a guy that I think I'd be really comfortable starting only in that scenario. I'm hopeful that we see at least one of the 2, Rashid Shaheed or Chris Olave, back in action. Really hopeful for Chris Olave. We saw that breakout sort of starting to happen this last week, so hopefully they can get back on the field, but if they can't, Juwan Johnson could be a really quality add. And last, but certainly not least, I just want to talk about some defenses here. I've talked about it in a couple of the trade videos as well. If you want to go look at defenses sort of streaming forward, I highly recommend you go look at those videos. Those will be helpful in terms of telling you guys which defenses have really optimal playoff schedules. But especially just looking at this week, I'll start things off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have obviously arguably the best matchup in football right now. They get to play the Carolina Panthers, who just can't move the ball on offense. Bryce Young's having a really tough time in his rookie season. They just fired their head coach. Not expecting a huge turnaround for them. I think you can easily play the Buccaneers defense this next week and expect big things. So they'd be a priority ad, and I bet they're available on waivers for you. The Colts will be another quality ad this next week. They play the Tennessee Titans, who really haven't been able to move the ball very effectively either. Will Levis has basically had one game so far where he's looked great, and it was against the Atlanta Falcons, so not someone that I'm super excited about, and I think that the Colts defense has obviously been playing well enough that you could use them for sure. Speaking of the Atlanta Falcons, they get to play the New York Jets this week. Certainly a plus matchup for them. I think that there's a really good case to be made here that the Jets defense offense might be the worst in the NFL, and in that case, the Atlanta Falcons are going to be a great defensive play. The Los Angeles Chargers, their defense actually looked really good this last week against the Baltimore Ravens. They get to face the New England Patriots, who are going to play a myriad of quarterbacks that are each going to keep throwing interceptions. So Los Angeles Chargers are a great streaming option as well. The Miami Dolphins, obviously they just lost Jalen Phillips. Their pass rush won't be quite as potent as it was the last couple weeks, but they play the Washington Commanders, who give up a ton of sacks. Sam Howell is a little bit turnover prone as well, so you could play the Miami Dolphins defense, although that one scares me just a little bit. There's some sort of potential there that the Commanders could just put up a lot of points and make that one a bad play. And then the Los Angeles Rams, I'll mention, they're going to be playing the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, the Rams defense hasn't been fantastic so far this season, but they're good enough. They're a professional defense. And the Cleveland Browns, with either a banged-up DTR, PJ Walker, or Joe Flacco at the helm, it's not something that I'd be super excited about. So I think the Rams could be a team that just are a really safe play as a defense, because I don't really see a world where the Browns put up a ton of points against them. So that'll do it for this week's waiver wire video. I've gone position by position and sort of went through which players should and shouldn't be added on waiver wires. As always, if you guys have any specific add or drop questions, even start-sit questions early on in the week, feel free to let me know. Give me as much context as you think is helpful, and I'll make sure I give you guys my opinion and help you guys get everything set, because I know these next couple weeks are going to be super important. We've obviously got a couple weeks to go before those playoffs, and we really want to making sure that we're either getting into the playoffs, getting those buys, or doing everything we can to have the best rosters we can once we get there. So obviously a big couple weeks here before we get into those playoffs, and hopefully you guys are in a position where you're looking really good. And then tomorrow I'll be putting out the trade target video. I'll go over buy lows and sell highs. I know a lot of you guys have had your trade deadlines already, but still useful to look at. Still, even if you haven't had those trade deadlines, players I'll talk about as well could be on your roster, should help give you guys some sort of context in terms of what to expect from them going forward as well. So hopefully you guys are finding these videos useful. If you guys want to make sure you don't miss any, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're at almost 970 subscribers right now, so just like 30 away from that goal of hitting 1,000 by the end of the season. I really think we can get there. It's been super cool to see the channel grow, and I really do truly appreciate all of you guys and all the support we've had so far this season. It's been a lot of fun, and we're just going to keep doing this, getting you guys some championships this year, and then we'll just keep going next year and all that. So really appreciate you guys so much. You guys mean a lot, and hope you guys are sticking around ready for the next video, and hopefully we can get you guys some championships here. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.